Welcome to Science, Magic, and Religion. That sounds like a lot of feedback, so how is that for you? Okay. Strange for me, but all right. So anyhow, welcome to the class. I was just going to take care of some administrative stuff at the top of the class, like your textbooks should already be at the UCLA textbook store. A lot of you have emailed me concerned that if you're on the wait list, you might not be able to get in. But as I emailed you, because the sections were capped at 15, we're able to take everybody off the wait list and still not exceed the usual quota of 20 students. Now, anything above 20 students, you're going to have to negotiate with your TA. That's entirely up to them. But for those of you who are on the wait list, you will be issued a PTE number this week. And those of you who are not on the wait list but really, really want to get into the class, I would suggest hanging in there, go to section, and see what happens, because usually there's attrition or people who signed up don't show up. So you'll probably be able to get in if you are persistent enough. And I guess we can just start, and we're going to start off something really simple, because this is kind of a complicated narrative. So before we try to interpret this scheme of science, magic, and religion historically, let's just figure out on the most abstract level what the objectives of these belief systems are. Science. As a belief system, as a body of practices, it's relating to the natural order, right? It wants to relate to the natural order in such a way that it can manipulate that order and be beneficial to mankind. We're not going to go right now into the methods, into the discipline, into the philosophy, but it's important just to keep in mind that it's human-centered. So science's objective is to serve humanity. And it's naturalistic, right? Its sphere of authority is going to be nature. Oh, now I didn't even think. Is that? Yes, good. Okay, so religion, in the most general sense, and of course there are going to be exceptions to this overly simplistic statement, relates to the supernatural order. So what do I mean by that? It relates to something that is ultimately transcendent. If there's a higher authority than what you're calling religion, then it isn't religion. So religion is, by its very definition, the supreme authority. And it, too, is a system of beliefs and practices. And it wants you to help you reconcile everything you do in this world to be in alignment, morally, physically, socially, politically, in alignment with this supernatural realm or with this ultimate reality. It lets you know that how you're living this life is the very best way you could be doing it, because your sources are the highest sources of authority, religious, divine. Now we got this third system, magic. And again, in a very general sense, what is it that magic does? Well, it interrelates these two worlds, the natural and the supernatural. It tries to take this energy, this mana, this sense that the world is permeated by some mystical force, some higher energy, and that a person who is magical, say a magician, is able to direct that supernatural energy to this worldly outcomes. So when you think about it, magic is going to be interfering perhaps or poaching on the terrain of both religion and science, because it's relating to the supernatural like religion, but it's also trying to affect outcomes in the real world. It's trying to be effective in the naturalistic order like science. Now, I've just been talking about the natural order and the supernatural order, but one thing we have to keep in mind is that boundary between nature and supernature, that's an idea, right? And where that boundary is drawn, where we're going to decide how that boundary exists, how porous that boundary is. Is this a boundary you can leap back and forth from, or is it a very inflexible boundary that is absolutely airtight? Those are historically determined facts. So that's a matter of culture. And we're starting off this first week talking about antiquity. And this course really deals with 1600 to the present, because it deals with science, magic, and religion as separate systems of belief. It already presupposes there's a boundary between the natural and the supernatural, because that is very much the premise on which science is founded. However, in antiquity, before modern science, before secularization, where was this boundary? Arguably, there was no such boundary. So if we try to understand the relationship between magic, science, and religion in antiquity, this is sort of the picture we get. Religion is the big cosmic picture. It is the most authoritative and total cosmology, the system of knowledge by which you understand and make sense of the world. Now, within that, you might have a body of practices that, in alignment with this higher philosophy, tell you how to direct some of that supernatural power into this realm, into the natural world. So magic would be a huge part of these practices in the, in a religious worldview. Some religions, almost the entire pursuit is magical. Some religions exclude magic. But in antiquity, this would have been our picture. In science, where would science belong? Well, if we're going to think about science as a kind of technology, science is embedded right there in the midst of these religious practices. If you are practicing, say, Egyptian funerary rites, well, you need to know a lot of details about anatomy. You need to know a lot about medicinal herbs so you can preserve things. So you're already practicing a very disciplined form of relating to the natural world. You've studied it, you understand the herbs, you're trying to produce real-world objectives like a body that will be mummified. Astronomy is another instance where science is embedded within a largest religious system. And here we have this sense that astronomy, very active in Babylonian worldviews and Chaldean worldviews and Egyptian and in Greek worldviews, was really a partner to the religious worldview of astrology. So then we have to ask ourselves, well, why are we beginning in antiquity? It's important that we understand that this is a different way of structuring the relationship between magic, science, and religion in modernity. And to understand why they have to be separate in modernity, you need to understand that there's something fundamentally pre-modern about having them all united. The other thing is, when we talk about magic in the modern world, what are we really talking about? We're talking about Babylonian astrology, Egyptian numerology and funerary practices, European agrarian fertility cults, Greek rational mysticism like the text from Heraclitus that I assigned this week. These are all sources of modern magic. So modern magic isn't invented whole cloth from modernity. It is really an adaptation of these survivals. And its most important source would be the Corpus Hermeticum. And that is a 3rd century CE text thought to be written by Neoplatonists. And when we look at it, we realize it's a repository of this entire Greco-Roman cosmology, which included Egypt and Persia and Babylonian sources and Greek sources. So we are dealing with already the survival of this deep intellectual archaeology of the vast Mediterranean world of antiquity. So for us to understand magic in modernity, we have to first address its sources in antiquity.